That morning I drove out to the cattle underpass beneath the state highway and found two brand new steel gates chained shut across both ends. A sign hung on the metal professor of Cedar Ridge. No lift access. Valerie Whitcomb stood on the far side with her arms folded, smiling like she had finally taught the cowboy across the fence a lesson he would remember. I asked her one question and only one. Valerie, are you certain you want this tunnel closed? She laughed at me. 3 hours later, the line of stopped vehicles on that highway stretched more than 4 miles in one direction. If you want to watch a homeowners association turn its own victory into a disaster, tap subscribe and stay with me until the very end. My name is Malcolm Rains. I am 52 years old and I run Rains Cattle Company on ground my grandfather bought with money he earned shoeing horses and hauling coal. We are a black family in a stretch of semi-rural Colorado where nobody expected us to last, and we lasted anyway through drought years and beef price collapses and 2 winters that killed more calves than I care to count. The ranch sits in a wide shallow valley with good grass on both sides of a long ridge. And it has been running cattle since long before anybody drew a subdivision map anywhere near it. I know every gate, every water tank, every soft spot in the creek bottom where a heater will bog down if you push her too fast. That land raised me before I ever managed it. The complication, and it has always been a complication, is that a state highway cuts my property clean in half. The north pasture holds most of my winter feed ground and my working pens. The south pasture holds the best summer grass, and more importantly, the reliable water, 3 springs that have never once gone dry in my lifetime. Twice a year, sometimes more, I have to move the herd from one side to the other. And for most of the 20th century, that meant walking cattle straight across the asphalt while somebody stood at each end waving a red flag at whatever traffic happened along. That worked when the highway carried 40 cars a day. It stopped working when it started carrying 12,000. So back in the late 1970s, when the state widened that road from 2 lanes to 4, the transportation department did something that was practical rather than generous. They built a cattle underpass beneath the roaded. A wide concrete box tall enough for a mounted rider and broad enough that a herd flows through it without piling up at the mouth. It cost the state money, but it cost them less than shutting a growing highway down twice a year forever. In exchange for the right-of-way they took across my grandfather's ground, they recorded an agreement guaranteeing our permanent right to move livestock through that structure. I do not own the highway. I never claim to. What I own in black ink on recorded paper is the legal right to use that passage for my cattle in perpetuity. Cedar Ridge Estates showed up almost 30 years after that concrete was poured. The developer bought a played-out hay farm on the east side, scraped it flat, and put up 140 houses with stone veneer entrances and a wrought iron sign and a fountain that runs even in February. The eastern mouth of my underpass sits maybe 200 feet from their landscaped entry corridor, which was a fact fully visible on every map any buyer was ever handed. Nobody moved a road, nobody moved a tunnel. A neighborhood simply got built next to a working ranch and then decided the ranch was the problem. Valerie Whitcomb bought the largest lot in the second phase and became board president within 18 months. I met her the first spring at the county fairgrounds and she shook my hand the way people do when they have already decided who you are. She liked to describe the area in meetings and in letters and to anyone who would hold still as an upscale residential community unfortunately stranded beside an outdated agricultural operation. That was her phrase. She used it enough that I could recite it back to her in her own cadence. She complained about my feed trucks on the county road, about the sound of a tractor at 6 o'clock in the morning, about summer dust. And eventually about the simple visual fact of cattle being visible from the subdivision entrance. Here is what matters, and I want it understood clearly before anything else happens in this story. I followed every rule. My ground is zoned agricultural and has been since zoning existed in that county. My operation predates their first foundation by generations. I hold current permits for everything requiring one. I keep my fences legal, and I have never once been cited for anything by the county. Cedar Ridge Estates has no authority over my land. None. Not a single acre of it. Their covenants bind the people who bought inside their boundary and nobody else on earth. Valerie never accepted that. She spoke to me the way a supervisor speaks to a subcontractor who is running behind schedule. And every conversation carried the assumption that her board's opinion functioned as law across the whole valley. She once told me, standing beside her vehicle with the engine running, that she was sure I understood how important first impressions were to property values. I told her I understood weaning weights and hay costs. She did not find that funny. It took me a while to see the real shape of it. The dust and the noise and the smell were the stated grievances, but they were never the actual grievance. Valerie was selling something, not literally, but in the way certain people sell an idea of a place to themselves and to everyone around them. She wanted a clean suburban picture, stone entry, green lawns, mountains in the distance, and my cattle were standing in the frame. I was not a nence to be managed. I was a thing to be removed from the view. I kept my head down and worked. Then one afternoon in early spring, I pulled a letter out of my mailbox that the Cedar Ridge board should never have sent. The envelope was heavy cream talk with the Cedar Ridge crest embossed on it, and inside was a cease and desist notice signed by Valerie as board president. It demanded that I immediately stop moving livestock through or near the corridor adjacent to their entrance. Effective within 30 days, the stated grounds were listed like a menu. My cattle created a visual detraction inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. My operation negatively impacted home values within the association. The animals produced odor. And my final favorite, the presence of livestock caused residents to feel their subdivision was not premium. That word premium appeared 3 separate times in 2 pages. I read it twice at the kitchen table and then I called her because I have always believed the cheapest way to end a fight is a conversation before anybody spends money. I told her plainly that I appreciated her concerns, that I was not a member of her association, that I had never signed her declaration, never paid $1 of dues, and never agreed to be bound by her covenants. I said her board could regulate the color of mailboxes inside Cedar Ridge all day long, and I would not say a word about it, but their authority stopped at their own boundary line. I said all of that calmly without raising my voice because I had already learned what happened when a man who looks like me raises his voice in that county. Her answer arrived without a pause and I have carried it around ever since. You may not live in our community, Malcolm, but everybody here still has to look at you. I let the silence sit for a moment to see whether she would hear herself. She did not. She went on to say that she was sure a person in my line of work had never had reason to understand the standards that governed a neighborhood where homes sold for well over $1 million and that she was not blaming me for that which somehow made it worse than if she had been. I did not argue. Arguing with someone like Valerie is a way of agreeing to fight on ground she chose. Instead, I went to my office, pulled the file drawer my father labeled in grease pencil 40 years ago, and put together a package for her. I sent the county parcel map with our boundaries highlighted. I sent a certified copy of the deed. I sent the recorded easement documents from the highway widening. And I sent the original Transportation Department correspondence describing the cattle underpass, its purpose, and our permanent right to move livestock through it. I paid for certified mail so there would be a signature on record. Everything I sent was public, verifiable, and boring, which is exactly what evidence should be. She barely looked at it. I know she barely looked at it because her response came back in 4 days and no attorney in this state reviews 4 documents in a survey in 4 days for a volunteer board. Her letter said that Association Council had reviewed the matter and that the board remained confident it controlled the land near the tunnel entrance. That was the whole substance. No citation, no parcel number, no reference to a single thing I had sent her. Just confidence, which is what people reach for when they have run out of facts. I sat with that letter a long time because there was something inside it worth noticing. Cedar Ridge did own something out there. When the developer platted the subdivision, the association took title to a narrow landscaping strip running alongside the access corridor, a decorative band of gravel and juniper and boulder groupings meant to make the entrance look intentional. That strip is real property and it genuinely belongs to them. What it does not include and what no version of any recorded map has ever included is the access corridor itself or the mouth of the underpass or the maintenance apron around the structure. Those sit inside a state-controlled right-of-way with an agricultural access easement recorded on top of it. So Valerie had a sliver of truth she had inflated into a kingdom. She owned juniper bushes and thought she owned a highway structure. That kind of error is very common with small boards. And it is usually harmless because most people never test it. It becomes expensive only when somebody with a clipboard and a survey shows up while the mistake is still standing in concrete. I could have called the transportation district office right then. I want to be honest that I considered it sitting at that table with her letter in my hand. But I decided to wait. A letter is a letter. Nobody had touched my access. Nobody had blocked anything. And I have watched neighbors burn $10,000 in legal fees over disputes that would have evaporated if either party had waited 2 more weeks. I filed her letter with my copies, told my foreman to keep the schedule, and went back to calving. 2 weeks later, I learned that Valerie had stopped writing letters. Monday morning, I had 180 heads standing in the north holding pen, sorted and ready with 2 ranch hands horseback and my foreman on the 4-wheeler. It was the 3rd week of May. The north pasture water was down to 1 working tank. The South Pasture Springs were running clean and strong, and I had planned that move around the weather for a month. I pulled out ahead of the herd to open the gates at the tunnel, the same thing I had done twice a year for 3 decades. And that is when I saw the steel. Both mouths of the underpass were closed with custom fabricated fence panels, powder-coated black, set into fresh concrete footings, industrial padlocks, the shrouded kind you cannot cut without a grinder. In front of the eastern gate sat 4 concrete planters, each one easily half a ton, filled with dirt and ornamental grass and arranged so tightly that a person could barely walk between them. There was a decorative masonry wall extension running off to one side, still curing. There was a security camera mounted on a new post with the lens aimed directly at my approach. And there was the sign white on green like a real traffic sign reading Prophetee of Cedar Ridge HOA. No livestock access. Valerie was already there. Of course, she was already there. She had timed it and she had brought an audience because standing beside her was Brent Holloway, the paid association manager, and 2 men in landscaping company polos, who very much wanted to be somewhere else.